or art therapy.
Hey
All of
everybody,
these
I'm
things
finishing this one
are
today.
incredibly useful. Now, if you want a book that's changed the way I view therapy, there is a book called Dibs, In Search of Self, D-I-B-S, In Search of Self. And I don't want, actually, you know what? I don't want to overtell the story, because when you read it, you're going to go in one direction. By the end of the book, it opens your mind in a different way. But long story short is this a kid who's largely nonverbal, and the parents think that he has some intellectual deficiency or disability. So they take him to therapy, and he's nonverbal and whatnot. And the therapist works with him and cracks the code. So beyond that, I'll encourage you to get the book. I won't ruin it for you. All right. So we talked about different things of play therapy, whether it be drawing, sand tray, figurines, puppet theater, quilting for trauma is good. Now, your group play therapy in the school should focus on interpersonal issues, how to relate with one another in the school, or issues that either are getting in the way of academic performance or things, skills to teach that help with academic performance. But play therapy can work with interpersonal stuff. And it also is valuable to create safety signals for the child. Now, shifting to adolescence. When we think of adolescence, that's from puberty until when you leave the home at early adulthood. So the time frame is anywhere between 11 or 12, roughly, all the way to about 25, right? So that's adolescence. And if we were to think about Erik Erikson says that during adolescence, this is a time period where we're trying to figure out who you are. You're trying to figure out your value system, what's important to you. You're trying to figure out what you want to do, right? What you want to do at the next step. You're trying to figure out relationships, both friendship relationships and romantic relationships. You're trying to figure out who you're attracted to and, how to express your love. You're trying to develop a clique or a friend group, right? All of these things are important. So you tend to have a lot of stress on you in adolescence and emerging adulthood. So you're just trying to figure everything out. Now, very, very common is that there's strong emotional reactions in adolescence, and very common there's a lot of tension both at home and in school. So if we go to G.S. Hall and Margaret Mead, which were two theorists, they had a debate whether adolescence is a period of calmness or a period of conflict. And what we find is that both of these theorists took the extremes, and it's somewhere in the middle. So Margaret Mead said that teenagers experience, it's the most peaceful time of their life is adolescence. And we know that's not entirely true. And G.S. Hall said it's a period of storm and stress. And we know that he overstated the level of conflict. So we do have conflict, but not at the level of G.S. Hall's argument. All right, so we want to work on family-based conflict and friend-based conflict as part of the process. Very, very common. Now, one thing that's interesting in adolescence is there is a shift from a focus of the parents having the most authority to your peers having the most influence over you. So there is this shift that happens where seeking approval from your peers matters. You're going to seek their approval more than anything. All right. Now, if you have a group experience that's positive, you're going to discover who you are, what your core values are, what your beliefs are, how you navigate relationships, and how you make decisions. All of these things can happen. Now, we know that in addition to figuring out who you are, we also know that adolescence is a time period where there is this naivete, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but it's almost like you believe the world is either perfect or should be perfect. And due to the idea of seeing imperfections in the world, you become advocates, right? A lot of social justice experiences emerge from teenagers. For example, March for Our Lives, right? So when we think about March for Our Lives, that is a national movement, but in New York, they were tired of the gun violence. So they did protests, they did rallies, and they met with legislators. And, gun violence is a problem. I think if you turn the news on this week, you would see it. But it's also a problem in the schools. So whether you look at Columbine or Newtown, Connecticut, or Stone and Douglas in Florida, we have decades after decades of kids shooting other kids, kids killing other kids. And when I say kids, you don't actually have to be a child, but you could be in this adolescent stage. So it's a problem, and because of that, March for Our Lives New York did a whole host of meetings, and they got a law passed called the Emergency Risk Protection Order. And this is a law that is similar to any order of protection, that if a person is at a risk, they have to create distance. There's a stay away plan. But for this, the Emergency Risk Protection Order is about staying away from guns. So a teacher, school counselor, principal can report a person as being a public safety threat, and you can get an order of protection where you remove their guns for a temporary period of time from the household. Now, some of you may not have guns in your household, but if you have guns in your household and a child is talking about shooting up a school, well, then we have to protect the public, and that law got passed. Now, with all orders of protection, they're temporary. So you're not taking away a person's guns forever. You have a certain period of time before the judge where it's a temporary order, and then after the judge rules, there's a certain amount of time that the order is in effect, and it has to be renewed. So in order to maintain the person not to have their guns. So I know that some people are like, oh, that's an infringement on the Second Amendment, but it's a temporary issue due to severe psychological distress that you want to make sure that the person doesn't do something regrettable for themselves or other people. But that comes out of advocating, right? And that is one of the strengths of adolescence. So finding your voice is another characteristic. All right, so when you're leading adolescent groups, you want to make sure that you're clear in your guidelines. You want to make sure that the rules of conduct are clear. You want to make sure that the people who are in your group respect you and accept you. A whole host of techniques can work, such as music, art, drama, humor. All of these things are important. You also want to deal with the biggest issue, which is trust and limits to self-disclosure. So with adolescents, you can oftentimes either overshare and put yourself in vulnerability of being bullied, or you might undershare because you don't trust. So finding that sweet spot is going to be important. And you want to deal with any inauthenticity in the group. Now, cultural sensitivity is going to be very important. You want to demonstrate respect and understanding of people's value system. You want to make sure you understand why a person says what they do. And trying to understand an adolescent does not mean you become one of them. So you don't have to behave in a way that's not dignified to gain their respect. Now, adolescents are going to challenge you. They're going to challenge you more than most groups. In fact, other than a prison population, adolescents are probably going to push you the most. So they're going to test you as a group leader, and they want to know that you're not going to model all the people who hurt them in the world, right? So you're an authority figure, so they're going to challenge authority, but you need to embrace that in a non-judgmental and a non-defensive way, and that's going to help you function better. All right. Now, learning the language that people speak is going to be important. And here's an example where kind of like I didn't get it. So, all right. So I remember I was working with a 12-year-old male who had significant issues in his home life and school. And I don't remember what he said, but he said to him, because of my reaction, he's like, you're tight. And now, generational gap, I said, thank you. And me saying thank you to him confused the hell out of him. Why am I saying thank you that he referred to me as tight?
That's true. That's stupid.
Well, in the 90s, when we wanted to give a compliment, we would say, oh, those shoes are tight, right? That would be a compliment.
Well,
but it's used differently today as I got you angry, or you're angry, you're bothered. But I didn't know that. So learning how to speak the language in a way that is received is important. So anyway, I must have been defensive at that point, but also it helped us bond learning. Now, in a school setting, you're going to deal with issues of metal detectors. You're going to deal with peace officers and law enforcement to reduce the likelihood of aggression and violence. But here's the deal. You can have as many metal detectors as you want. You can have as many peace officers as you want, but that's not going to solve the problem. And in fact, you may hear this language referred to, speaking of other legislation we're working on in New York State, is to address what's referred to as the school to prison pipeline. Some of you may know what this is, some of you may not know what this is. But the school to prison pipeline suggests that how we discipline minority youth actually puts minority youth at greater risk for incarceration. So when we suspend or expel teenagers from school, or we are overly punitive, we run the risk of them finding another outlet for their time. They're more likely to come through it, more likely to engage in criminal activities. So we are working on a law in New York State, as part of New York State Psychological Association, to change how schools deliver discipline. And it's called the Equitable Discipline Law that we're working on, to change it to a more compassionate approach, to a more supportive approach, rather than a punitive approach, because there are way too many minority youth and 20s, 20 to 30 individuals in jail cells. And so whatever, we want to change it. So metal detectors and law enforcement presence does not solve the problem. So let's find a way to do that. So doing groups to help people deal with anger management and conflict resolution is going to be much better at addressing the problem. So anger management, conflict resolution, you can run, either one of these can be a group. So everybody gets angry. I've been angry before. I'm sure everybody in this class has been angry. But it's what you do with the hurt you feel. I know I sound like Mr. Rogers right now. It's what you do with the anger you feel that matters. Because anger does not have to turn into aggression. Conflict brings intimacy, but conflict does not have to fuel violence. So in groups targeting anger and conflict, you want to help people develop interpersonal skills to talk things out, to engage in problem-solving behavior, to engage in self-talk, because sometimes you might be dealing with another person who's equally dysregulated, but they have reckless abandonment. So you might have to talk yourself down not to do something that's regrettable. So teaching these skills could be useful. So shifting towards college counseling centers is another school-based setting. Again, it's time limited, many times lasting only up to 16 weeks. And you might be like, well, why 16 weeks? Because most semesters are about 15 to 16 weeks. They tend to focus on educational development, tend to deal with school mastery and passing one's classes. And I know we have a counseling center. We ran these groups for people. We also could have career planning groups. What's ironic is that I'm talking to you about this, and sure enough, these were some themes we discussed in our group, such as stress about what comes next. I think Brenda said that, right? So career planning and the anxiety that comes with school and stress management and grief groups, all of these are important. Now, it's interesting, by the time you're in college, you probably have dealt with a loss. If it's a grandparent, that's the most common. If it's a parent, that's also somewhat common. So you can run grief groups to help deal with grief and loss. COVID has created a whole host of grief groups on university levels. Cultural identity groups. So, St. Francis College and the CUNY system, they're really, really good because there's tremendous diversity. So helping us appreciate individual differences and celebrate those differences are important. Non-traditional age groups. So St. Francis College also, we have first generation college students, and there's no expiration date on education. So we have a larger number of non-traditional age students. So what if you're an older student and you're around a bunch of people 18 to 22, you might feel out of place. So having a group to help non-traditional college students cope could be useful. And as always, self-esteem groups, right? That's tremendous in middle school, high school, and college. These are very common. All right. Now, what are the key points? So if you're going to design a group in a school, make sure you get administrator support. I think I've said this before. Do not go rogue because you're leaving yourself at risk. If your administrator doesn't support your group, don't run it, no matter how well-intentioned it is. You want to communicate with students and children about the importance of keeping confidence. Now, if you're in the same class with someone and people share very vulnerable aspects of their life, you don't want people going around talking about that. You want to keep the privacy. So what happens in group stays in group, and you want to say it in a way that they understand, right? And you might even talk, especially because there's a level of egocentrism at this age. You want to talk about, you wouldn't want someone talking about you, right? So we want to keep everything private or confidential. Now, don't just throw every kid who has a learning problem, self-esteem issues, being bullying into a group. Not every child is ready for group participation. And even if they are ready for the group, they may not share as much. Involve parents in the group work with the children. That isn't to say you share with the parents what they say in the group, but if there are exercises that are meant to be done between groups, you might link the parents in to ensure that they get done. And then role playing is quite useful, especially when it comes to peer pressure and whatnot. And that, my friends, is today's lesson. Okay. One thing I didn't say in the lesson is also you want to make sure that kids don't feel like you're talking down to them. And I'm used to the word kids, which in of itself might be a bias. But if you're working with children, adolescents, you don't want to be like, oh, what do you know? You're just a teenager, things like that. You want to make sure that you don't engage in ageism. I know that when you think of ageism, you might think middle adulthood or late adulthood, but there is a form of ageism called adultism, where you believe that if you're not an adult, you know nothing. You're meant to be seen and not heard. But children, adolescents, they have ideas, they have wisdom, and it's your job to celebrate their wisdom and not negate their experience. So with that, I'm going to stop. Does anyone have any questions before we conclude today's session?
There's also the effect of emotional deprivation and neglect on babies. So this is old, but still very true.
Emmanuel, élevé dans sa famille, est avide de saisir tout objet nouveau en vue d'une exploration active, de passer d'une main à l'autre, de porter à la bouche, par exemple. Totalement absorbé par ces manipulations, l'enfant prête peu d'attention à son entourage. Christine, régulièrement confiée à une crèche de jour, ne semble pas présenter un comportement différent de celui de l'enfant précédent. Elle saisit les cubes des deux mains, essaie de les superposer, les récupère quand ils tombent. Elle aussi est tout absorbée par son jeu. Ces deux exemples nous ont montré le cas d'enfants dont les conditions familiales offrent toute sécurité. Par contre, lorsque ces conditions sont défavorables, au point de nécessiter un retrait et une hospitalisation, le comportement du nourrisson va s'en ressentir, ainsi qu'en témoigneront les séquences suivantes. Caroline, dont la mère s'est médiocrement souciée, est anorexique. Cet enfant porte bien la main à un cube, mais en fait elle s'y intéresse faiblement. Très souvent, elle jette un regard interrogateur autour d'elle. Son exploration reste active, mais elle semble surtout préoccupée par son entourage. Dans les cas qui vont suivre, le souci croissant de l'environnement et l'inquiétude décuplée auront pour corrélatif un amoindrissement de l'attention prêtée au jeu. Par exemple, Véronique également anorexique, manifeste son refus en écartant ses mains d'un geste d'évitement. Si finalement elle saisit un cube, les regards inquiets qu'elle jette autour d'elle témoignent de son anxiété. Son attitude est figée, elle ne joue pas. Jean, retiré très tôt à sa famille et hospitalisé après plusieurs placements, épie attentivement les gestes du psychologue. La carence affective dont cet enfant a souffert semble faire primer chez lui le besoin de contact social qu'on pourrait motiver par le désir intense de l'enfant de trouver un substitut maternel. L'intérêt porté aux objets nouveaux est nul. Il acceptera sans résistance, mais sans intérêt véritable, le cube que l'on place dans sa main. René, dont le cas est similaire, se tient immobile devant les cubes. Au bout d'un moment, il fait mine d'en saisir un, mais il est en proie à une angoisse telle que peu à peu, il se désintéressera totalement et du jeu et de son entourage. Épuisé, il s'absorbe en lui-même et se réfugie dans une satisfaction haute. Tu sais son pouce. Annette, qui est aussi anorexique, a l'attitude figée. Son désintéressement est presque total. L'anxiété grandissante se traduit par des mouvements de lèvres, des clignotements et par une respiration irrégulière. L'autisme se lit dans le regard vague de cette petite fille. Nous retrouvons chez Colette, privée d'affection et de soins, les mêmes symptômes d'autisme et d'anxiété. Gestes figés, respiration haletante. Ainsi donc, la carence affective suscite chez le nourrisson non seulement l'angoisse, bien connue des psychologues, mais elle favorise, en présence d'objets nouveaux et dans des situations inaccoutumées, une inhibition parfois doublée d'autisme dans les cas les plus graves.
Excuse me. So there's one more on groups, and I wanted to get it for you guys for this week.
Let me see what's inside the box. And take.
So yeah, for your final paper, some of you are asking about citations, and I do this for searching articles. Pay close attention to the Google Scholar stuff. This is helpful too.
You found a new hobby. So your personal info.
I'll show it and then call it a day because we'll see y'all Monday.
Hi, everybody. I wanted to introduce you to a couple other resources rather than just EBSCOhost to find journal articles and books and book chapters. So I'm going to share my screen. And the first one that I'd like to introduce you to is something called Google Scholar. Google Scholar allows you to identify articles that are linked to a person and topics. So I'm just going to put my name in and see if any of my articles come up. So there it is. So it's interesting that several of my articles do pop up. So you have in 2017, I guess, well, technically 2016, I did a study with a couple of colleagues to see what factors influence support for various political parties. And this was the election of Donald Trump in 2016. And we found that mortality salience increased support for Donald Trump. Other examples of articles are a study that I did on spiritual intelligence and mental health, existential functioning in mental health, trauma systems therapy to work with refugees, and so forth. But it's interesting, not all of my articles come up, but some you could find and you'll see a PDF at different places. I'm going to talk about ResearchGate as well. But what's nice about Google Scholar is that you could also modify the time range, you could modify what you get, and you could see how many times it was cited. So if you wanted to use this article as a framework to find other articles that are related, you could click the citations and sure enough, there are other articles that could be used. So we could use one article to build as a resource for other articles. And so this article on mortality salience, right, and support for Donald Trump as a president in 2017 was published, and since then has been cited 21 times. So now we could go to other ones as well and see how they were cited. So if you're interested in spiritual intelligence, you could see that you could find some of these articles that way too, which is great. So this is just another resource. So let's say I was interested in sex-based microaggressions, which I'm working on a research study with another student on microaggressions and the impact of the relationship to the aggressor and how that impacts your experience. So, you know, I could use Google Scholar and sex microaggression scale and then get a bunch of articles. And because of the words I use, you're going to get a whole host of aggressions related to sex, gender, sexual orientation, and you can find articles this way. What's nice about Google Scholar is that it's free, right? So if for whatever reason you can't log into the library and can access resources, you can find other resources this way. So I'm going to go back to the home page, and I just want you to know that the web page is https://scholar.google.com. I want to introduce you to a second resource, which is called ResearchGate. Now, ResearchGate is self-populated, so it's the individuals who do the research upload their own stuff. So you might be able to gain access to information that's not yet public. So if I go to my profile, right, on ResearchGate, I could click research, and you can see all the different research studies that I've done, right? Whether they be research articles, whether they be personal statements against racial injustice, whether it be book chapters, anything that's related to me is here. Now, I do want to caution you when using ResearchGate, because since it's uploaded by the person themselves, it is possible that you might get what's called gray material. Gray material is a source of research that may not be peer-reviewed, or it might be weaker, or it might not be scholarly in nature. So you want to be mindful of that. And I'll give you an example of my own work. I did work with New York State Psychological Association to introduce a series of resolutions on diversity. And this is in 2018, where we helped give the council a vote on 17 different groups. Now, these are resolutions on diversity, and they're not published in an article, but if you click view full text, you'll see that all the people who are involved, the various diversity statements in general, the age-related diversity statements, disability-related, religion and diversity statements, race and ethnicity, and all of that. But this was never published in a journal. So it's very, very important to understand that even though this models scientific writing, this would not be considered a scholarly source, even though there's tremendous scholarship in this, right? You see the articles being cited through and through, but that doesn't matter because it wasn't published in a book or a journal article. But I do think that ResearchGate is another source to find articles, just in case the library doesn't have the article. You can request an article. For example, let me see, I might have requested, I requested an article and people requested from me. So let me see in my notifications. Here's good. So this is on group therapy and whether or not multiple group leaders is better than having a single group therapist as a leader. So I requested from one of the authors a copy of their journal article because I couldn't gain access to it from the library, and they were nice enough to share their full text. So I download it now, and I'm able to access it. So now I'm going to share with you what they gave me. So here it's a referee journal, a journal through the American Psychological Association, and they shared with me their article, which was very, very kind. So when we think about it, what did I want to give you with this lecture is that in addition to EBSCOs, in addition to the database searches that you have to your disposal at the library, there are other resources. And I have to tell you that I did not go into an all-inclusive list. I just gave you an example of two, Google Scholar and ResearchGate, which are additional resources for you. There are hundreds of resources available, but this hopefully gives you a flavor of what I'm talking about. So I'm gonna stop this video here and we'll go from there.
All right, so you guys can use any of the Google Scholar. I love it because you can sort through the different years. If you want to cite more recent stuff in the past few years, it gives you that option. Some of that helps a ton. I wish I had it when I was in undergraduate. With that, actually, geez, time flies. I know a lot of you guys are doing remote and asynchronous. Times are busy. But one super important message is if you are a senior in field next year, we're getting a huge scholarship coming. We applied for a grant in November. It's Dayton students in Central State. It's a huge amount of money. And if you do your internship, I asked if Great Minds excluded you, and she said, no, you can double dip with Great Minds also. So it's like a scholarship for the tuition, a stipend, and then also a bit of money for either like car, gas, electric, water, basic living expenses. So it's a great deal. We're going to have an info session here quickly in like 2 weeks, but I've got to get names together and get you guys on board because they want 8 for next year. And there may be 8 of you in field next year. So keep that in mind and we'll see you soon.